Ever had one of those dreams that just feels real, like
Yeah.
incredibly vivid, and it just sticks with you?
Oh, definitely. Sometimes long after you wake up.
Yeah, maybe even a dream about something that seems completely out there, almost impossible.
Huh.
Okay, let's unpack this because today we're diving into a story that takes that exact idea and, well, runs with it into some really fascinating territory.
And what's really compelling, I think, is when a deeply personal experience like a dream seems to sort of mirror or maybe even foreshadow big historical events.
Exactly.
It really makes you wonder about, connections we might not always see.
Totally. You shared a couple of really interesting sources with us. That audio clip, Per's 3 Abrahamic Religions, and the PDF, Honor. Now, they cover a lot, but we're going to zoom in on this really remarkable dream described in honor.pdf.
The Moscow Dream.
Right, the Moscow Dream. It's what the author apparently had years before it actually happened.
Hmm.
And it's all about Reverend Moon's visit to Moscow and kind of its symbolic weight as communism was nearing its end.
Hmm.
So our mission today is to really explore this specific dream, how it apparently came true, and what it might suggest about the author's view on these major world events.
It certainly brings up a big question, doesn't it? How do we make sense of these kinds of stories? Personal experiences that seem to just line up perfectly with major historical shifts.
Is it just chance?
Or could there be something more going on, which is clearly what the author believes?
Well, the author definitely sees more than just coincidence here. Early on, they talk about this idea. They call them dream seeds.
Dream seeds, yeah. Interesting term.
And they give this powerful example in that audio clip, a childhood dream about their house catching fire,
Right.
which tragically actually happened later.
Wow.
Makes you think
Yeah.
this idea that maybe some dreams hold a kind of potential, a future waiting to unfold almost.
That term dream seed, it's quite evocative. It suggests something planted, maybe subconsciously, that could, germinate later in the real world. And given the author's broader perspective, it hints at a belief where the spiritual and the material are very much linked.
And that brings us right to the Moscow Dream. In the PDF Honor, the author writes, and I'm quoting here, Moscow Dream in March 1990, a dramatic spiritual phenomenon happened like a mighty earthquake that sent shockwaves through my inner being. A dream that I had 7 years prior had just come true.
You can almost feel the astonishment in those words, can't you?
Absolutely. 7 years. That's a long time to hold on to a dream like that and then to see it actually play out.
That 7-year gap is pretty significant, I'd say. It moves it beyond just like a vague feeling or a hunch.
Right.
It suggests a much deeper link to an event way off in the future. And calling it a dramatic spiritual phenomenon, well, that really underscores their conviction that this was something out of the ordinary.
So what was the dream itself about? It's centered on Reverend Sun Myung Moon visiting Moscow.
Okay.
And just for context, the author notes that Reverend Moon was known as a staunch anti-communist fighter. So him going to Moscow.
Right, that context is crucial. Remember 1990, the Soviet Union was in massive flux. The whole Eastern Bloc was changing dramatically.
Yeah.
So for someone like Reverend Moon, with his very public, long-standing opposition to communism, to actually be in Moscow at that specific time, that carried huge symbolic weight. It signaled a potential major shift.
And what actually happened in 1990? Reverend Moon did go to Moscow. He was there with the World Media Association, which was sponsored by the Washington Times Foundation, something he founded.
So the core event predicted in the dream actually occurred.
It seems so. And the scale of this conference wasn't small either. The World Media Conference had over 3,000 attendees.
3,000, wow.
Yeah, diplomats, journalists, TV reporters, even, get this, 50 former heads of state.
50 former heads of state. That really highlights the global significance of this event. It wasn't just a minor gathering.
Definitely not.
Having that many influential figures present suggests it was seen as a really important moment for dialogue, a recognition of the changing world order.
But here's where it gets intensely personal for the author.
Yeah.
At that time, they were working with the staff at the Unification Theological Seminary, or UTS.
Okay.
And apparently, out of a large group, Unification Church leaders, over 40 UTS professors and employees, the author and their wife, were among just a tiny handful selected to actually go to Moscow as part of the world media staff.
Really? Out of that many people?
Yeah. The author even asks, rhetorically, could this be a coincidence?
You can see why they'd ask that. The statistical improbability.
Right. It makes you stop and think, especially given the dream they'd had years before.
It definitely reinforces their feeling that this wasn't just random. It's like they were meant to be there right at that significant moment, perfectly aligning with the dream.
Exactly. And the author says when they heard the news about going to Moscow, that 7-year-old dream just replayed in their mind like a videotape.
I can only imagine that feeling. Powerful.
Must have been overwhelming. And what did they do? They actually wrote a letter to President Kim about the dream and its significance.
Ah, okay.
Now, we don't have the letter itself in the sources, but the fact that they wrote it shows how deeply this whole thing resonated, how important they felt it was to document and share.
That act of writing, it really underlines their strong belief in the dream's importance, not just personally, but maybe on a bigger scale within their community or organization.
Yeah, trying to articulate the meaning behind this convergence of inner experience and outer reality.
Makes sense.
So the author and their wife head off to Moscow. And the author wasn't just, an observer. They had significant responsibilities.
Like what?
They were basically the liaison between the hotel management and the world media organizers, handling hospitality, logistics.
So right in the thick of it?
Absolutely. And they were also in charge of transportation, coordinating buses for tours to historic sites, meetings in the Kremlin with Soviet officials, even an evening at the famous Bolshoi Theater.
Wow, the Kremlin, the Bolshoi, that puts them right at the center of these high-level interactions.
And they mentioned specifically feeling God and heaven at the Bolshoi Theater. It adds this really personal, spiritual layer to their experience of these, quite political and historical events.
That Bolshoi Theater event sounds incredibly symbolic on its own.
It does. The attendees listed: President and Mrs. Gorbachev.
Gorbachev himself?
Yep, and Reverend and Mrs. Moon, plus loads of other special guests, high-ranking officials, dignitaries.
Just picturing that scene, Gorbachev, the leader of the Soviet Union, and Reverend Moon, known as this staunch anti-communist figure, in the same room at the Bolshoi.
It's a striking image, isn't it?
It really is. It represents this meeting of, well, seemingly opposing worlds, a potential bridging of huge ideological gaps at such a critical point in history.
And for the author, having dreamt about Moon's visit years before and then witnessing this specific scene, it must have felt like an incredibly powerful validation of that original vision.
You'd have to think so.
And this is really where the author connects the dots. They draw a direct line from the fulfillment of their dream, this actual meeting in Moscow, to the larger narrative of the downfall of communism.
How so?
They interpret it as a significant moment, potentially symbolizing what they see as Reverend Moon's victory over communism.
Okay, so it's about the symbolic weight of that meeting in that place at that time, given Moon's known position.
Exactly. It's crucial to focus on the author's interpretation here, as laid out in the sources we have. The text emphasizes their understanding of Moon's visit as symbolically pivotal, especially given the changes sweeping the Soviet Union.
And the dream, seen through that lens, takes on this profound meaning in how the author understands history unfolding around them.
Precisely. And the author then sort of zooms out, emphasizing their core belief in the vital role of dreams, but also visions and intuition.
Right. They see these as crucial communication channels.
Yeah, the main arteries, they call them, through which the spiritual world communicates with us. And there's another quote here. "You will come to understand the mechanics of the Holy Spirit, and will come to know how the spiritual world works through the function of its main arteries. Dreams, visions, and intuition, and communicate with us people on earth, and prepare us to make the next leap of faith according to God's new timetable."
That really lays out a whole worldview, doesn't it?
It does.
It suggests that these personal spiritual experiences aren't just random or isolated. They're part of a bigger divine plan or communication network. So dreams in that framework aren't just for personal guidance. They could be indicators of broader spiritual or historical movements, offering glimpses into what the author sees as God's plan unfolding.
It's a fascinating perspective. And finally, just to round it out, the author expresses gratitude in honor.pdf. They specifically thank Reverend Sun Gil Moon and HSA Publications for inspirational works like The Divine Principle. But they also acknowledge a really wide, diverse range of other figures. People who've written about Moon, others who've written about divine plans, but also names like Benazir Bhutto, Billy Graham, Juan Cole.
That is a diverse list. Benazir Bhutto, Billy Graham, Juan Cole. It suggests someone drawing inspiration from many different sources and fields of thought.
Yeah, it points to a real intellectual openness, pulling from various perspectives to shape their understanding of these, well, deeply personal yet historically significant experiences.
Makes sense.
So to kind of wrap up our deep dive today, we've looked closely at this author's really remarkable story, this prophetic dream about Reverend Moon visiting Moscow, years before it happened.
Right, and how this dream seemed to come true during a truly pivotal moment in world history, the decline of communism.
And we explored the author's interpretation of that convergence, seeing it as a significant, even symbolic victory.
And underlying this specific story is the author's really profound belief in the power of dreams, visions, intuition, seeing them as key ways the divine communicates, shaping their life and their understanding of history.
It really does make you think, doesn't it? What do you, listening, make of an experience like this? How do your own significant personal moments, maybe even dreams or strong intuitions, intersect with the big events happening in the world or with your own beliefs?
It's a good question. Perhaps the author's account encourages us to pay a bit more attention to those inner nudges, those seemingly random thoughts or vivid dreams. Maybe they hold more meaning or connection than we usually assume.
Maybe so. If exploring this one dream and its potential significance has caught your interest, you might want to check out the author's book, Honor Thy God: 3 Abrahamic Religions, to see the other dreams and spiritual insights they share.
It certainly offers a unique way of looking at both personal experience and major global events.
Definitely leaves you with something to mull over, the potential for our own inner lives to offer unexpected perspectives on the world stage.